This is the issue I have so often with the fact that people focus on racial profiling and say, well, look, people of color commit more crimes. Yes, but you're looking at the symptom as if it's the problem, where in fact, there's a very good possibility that there are completely different issues, completely different factors that are involved in creating the outcome that you're looking at that you're not considering. Welcome to the Ignited Recovery Podcast, a new way forward for anyone looking for answers but feeling left out. If you've been searching for empowerment, triumph, and purpose, you've found them right here. You won't hear the same solutions, and you're not going to have any excuses to fall back on, because Ignited Recovery allows heroes to rise and become their best selves. I'm Dr. Adi Jaffe, and I can't wait to be your guide on this journey. Are you ready to become an ignited hero? Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Ignited Recovery Secrets Podcast. I'm Adi Jaffe, and I'm here to try to unpack a somewhat complicated topic today, so stay with me. I'm still staying on racial inequality and topics related to that, but it follows a conversation I had with a friend about the movie 13, about the 13th Amendment. Those of you who haven't seen it, has a lot to do with the idea that incarceration is the new segregation and that laws are written purposefully to keep Black people marginalized and suffering, essentially enslaved. Now, the reason I really wanted to do this here today was because I love my friend, a really insightful conversation. We had a really, really good talk about it. And I've talked about issues related to crime before, but I really actually see this as the synergy of where my expertise in addiction, my experience as a drug dealer and a drug addict and a user myself for years, and the work that I've done for the last 15, 16 years, they all really, really come together. And the reason I say that is this is not a simple discussion. I'm not a big believer in conspiracy theories. See the episode that I linked to below where I kind of went on my own little rant about it. But that doesn't mean that there are not powers at play that have interests that don't serve everybody and over time can end up creating huge kind of scaled effects that were or were not expected on the front end. I don't know, but are unfair. And the place I really want to visit that when it comes to this is the addiction problem in marginalized groups like Latino and Black communities, and how that ends up leading to incarceration. And weirdly, my experience has informed a lot of that. And so for those of you who don't know, that there used to be a huge disparity, and now there is still a disparity, but a smaller one, when it comes to possession of certain drugs. And specifically, I am thinking about powder cocaine and crack cocaine. And that came up around the 80s when crack cocaine ravaged America. And so in 1986, the Anti-Drug Abuse Act was passed to try to control that. Now, here's the thing. The people who were selling crack were good at what they were doing. And because crack is predominantly a cheap drug used by people of lower socioeconomic status, predominantly, not only, but it was ravaging Black communities. And dealers in the Black communities were smart. They knew that, if you gave somebody $1,000 worth of crack to go sell, there were better odds that either they would get caught and get in severe trouble, and then you lost your drugs, your money, and your soldier, but also that they might just run away with your drugs. So the way drug dealing worked in many of these communities was the people who were on the street selling the drugs would only get 1, 2, or 3 rocks at a time. Sometimes they'd hunt it under their tongue, sometimes in their socks, whatever. They would get a very small amount. They would go out into the street, into their corners. They would sell the drugs. They would come back. They would give the money, and they would get more drugs. That was different than the way drug dealing, especially around cocaine, let's say, was traditionally done, where you would go to some dealer's place or house, etc., pick up a quantity, and leave with it. What that left law enforcement with was a problem. They could never get to the people who had large quantities of drugs to arrest them. So all the soldiers on the street were getting arrested for these petty crimes, getting released, going back out into the street because they only had, a quarter of a gram or an eighth of a gram. on them. And so the solution that they came up with in this 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act was to completely change the ratio, the amount of drug you had to have on you for crack cocaine at which you could get arrested for dealing. And the ratio was insane. It was 1 to 100. Just for reference, that meant that 1/100th of a gram of crack, which is a speck, will get you in the same legal trouble as a gram of cocaine. Take that to the next level. 1 gram of crack cocaine, just a handful of rocks, 2, 3, 4 rocks, will get you in the same trouble as somebody who had 100 grams of cocaine powder. Now, I truly believe that when this first came out, it seemed a good idea given the fact that crack was being sold in this way, and that, they wanted to be able to find ways to scare the people on the street who were selling the drugs to turn in higher and higher level dealers and get to the core of the problem. Underlying the entire issue we're talking about is the entire concept of the drug war, which we can get into in a different episode. I'm not going to be able to get into it here because it'll just take us 30 minutes, and Fridays are not about that. So here's the thing. Police officers asked for this ability to sort of arrest the street level dealers who were selling for dealing, even though they had very, very small quantities. I don't believe it was a conspiracy. I really don't. Is it? Maybe. But I don't believe it was a conspiracy. I think they were looking for a tactic. But here's the thing. Crack use was predominantly destroying and being dealt in this way within Black communities. And so what it did was it took literally busloads of young Black men and put them away for 5 years or more for quantities of cocaine that were just minuscule, honestly. Now, there was a huge discrepancy. Everybody saw it. It was obvious to everybody within years. So much so that in 1995, the U.S. Sentencing Commission saw that the disparity in sentencing created an actual racial imbalance in federal prisons and led to more severe sentences for low-level crack dealers than for wholesale suppliers of powder cocaine. Again, I want to repeat that. They found that cocaine dealers, the bigger dealers who were selling ounces or quarter pounds or kilos of cocaine, were sometimes getting lower sentences than street-level runners, essentially, of cocaine for bigger dealers. There's no question that since the 80s, since this came up, it created a massive, massive influx of young Black men into prisons. Now, here's the thing. Here's sometimes where it doesn't matter whether there was a conspiracy or not. What it left was neighborhoods, ghettos, whatever you want to call them, that were essentially devoid of men who could also then earn a living, support their families, etc. And then we know this from psychology. We know you leave single family homes in abject poverty and crime is more likely to happen. So essentially, by putting this system in place, we almost guaranteed at least another 1 or 2 generations of high crime. And because it was happening within those communities, we then blame the communities again for the crime, even though we essentially handicapped them. It's literally like cutting somebody's leg off and then saying, run faster, right? They had nobody earning money. Moms had to take care of kids who were still there. It created single family homes in just low income levels. And then crime proliferated over and over and over. And that's a cycle we found ourselves in over the last 30 or 40 years. And we can point the finger at whoever we want, but it is the reality that we found ourselves in. Now, in 2010, the Obama administration didn't eliminate this discrepancy, but it cut it to 18 to 1 instead of 100 to 1, making it a little bit better in the grand scheme of things. Here's where the rubber meets the road to me, right? When you have these huge discrepancies in imprisonment, you essentially, like I said, handicap entire populations. You put somebody in prison for 5, 10, 15 years, they don't come out the same person. They don't know how to function in everyday society in the same way. Now you bring them into neighborhoods and social systems that have been damaged and handicapped in this way over decades, and crime and addiction are going to run rampant. This is the issue I have so often with the fact that people focus on racial profiling and say, well, look, people of color commit more crimes. Yes, but you're looking at the symptom as if it's the problem, where in fact, there's a very good possibility that there are completely different issues, completely different factors that are involved in creating the outcome that you're looking at that you're not considering. I think this happens in many ways, right? I think it's one of the things that's happening in indigenous people, like in Native Americans, around alcohol use, et cetera, right? You marginalize, destroy, and stomp on another society, and the implications are far-flung and long-reaching, right? You can deal with decades, maybe even hundreds of years of suffering in this way. And I'm not even just talking about the trauma that people experience and how hard of a time they have dealing with their life again. Imagine for a second, you're a single dad, there's almost no jobs in your neighborhood, and someone offers you a way to make some money by selling on the street. Everybody's doing it. You go and you do it. You get arrested. You go away for 5 to 10 years. Your family is now left alone completely. The trauma that being in prison for 5 to 10 years is now on you. The trauma in your children, your wife, your girlfriend, whatever, in your family is now part of this equation. The society that you are part of is included in the entire kind of equation that we're talking about here, and it's almost impossible to unravel. And so, yes, there's a reality of increased crime in poor neighborhoods and low socioeconomic status environments. We know that. The question is, are we going to continue believing that just hitting the hammer harder will get us where we want to go? Because it hasn't worked, right? It hasn't worked. And what I'm suggesting here is it's never going to work, because the hammer itself creates damage that you then have to repair, right? And so here's what we are going to have to figure out at some point. And as I mentioned already, I'm not a conspiracy theory believer. And so I think we're going to have to figure this out through both ground level work like we're doing here and talking and changing the way people look at this problem, but then also laws and sentencing, etc. The idea of giving people alternative ways to support themselves, to make something of themselves, to grow their community, to grow their families, to grow their capacity, their resources, is on us. It's on us in the same way that it was on us to try to figure out how to solve the crack problem, and we decided to, no pun intended, crack down on low-level dealers. We have to figure out what to do with the impact of that. And as we're seeing over and over, and there's no way to ignore it, and it's just going to be here again if we try to pretend that it's not the problem. If we just come down harder, we're going to end up in a situation with another 1 or 2 generations that is limited, that is hamstrung, that is damaged by our actions. You know, and as I mentioned before, it's not just the trauma. We're talking epigenetics. We're talking about biological changes in people's ability to function, to handle stress, to deal with the realities that are in front of them. It's really easy to tell people to pick themselves up by their bootstraps when you got boots when you were younger and were taught how to build and how to create businesses or get a job and things of that nature. When that is not around in your environment, because the men are all imprisoned, it's pretty difficult to suggest that that should somehow magically happen. So here's the thing. Whether the 13th Amendment was an explicit exercise in imprisoning people of color and keeping slavery going or not is less the issue. Whether the crack laws were put in place specifically in order to damage Black communities, for me, at least, is less the issue. We have to fix these systems, right? We have to fix them because they're not, if they weren't put in place to do that, they're not doing what we said they were supposed to do, which is keep us safer, right? Instead, what they've done is perpetuated the trauma, perpetuated the struggles, and it's up to us to stop it now. Thank you all for listening. I'd love to hear your comments about some of these things. So screenshot right now, leave me a message. This is going to be a long-term problem unless we start offering long-term solutions. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great weekend. See you next week. Thank you for tuning in to the Ignited Heroes Recovery Podcast. I really hope you found the information here useful and that we'll see you back here next week. And look, I want to make sure that this podcast is the most useful it can be for you, so please let me know by emailing info@ignited.com if there are any specific topics or questions you'd like to have addressed. As usual, if you like this episode, I would love for you to leave us a 5-star review and rating. Thanks, and see you next week.